Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the With Chinese Characteristics podcast. I'm Natalie.
I'm Cherry.
And together we talk about topics from Chinese history and culture and politics. So Cherry has a topic for us today. So why don't you take it away?
So today's topic is about Chinese marriages.
All right.
The year is 2020.
The ear?
The year.
Yeah? Like on my head?
No, okay. Say both words. Say both of them.
Year, not ear. But anyway,
they sound the same.
Okay,
They sound exactly the same.
Yeah. Cut out me, mocking your master of the English language.
No, I'm keeping that in.
Okay, we'll keep that in.
Shows the arrogance
of these Americans.
Plain-spoken Americans who aren't that good at English anyways.
It's true. Well, we're going to talk about marriages now?
Yeah, let's talk about marriages. Okay. So the reason I really wanted to talk about marriages today is because this year is 2020 and the National People's Congress of the PRC passed its first civil code. It is a 1260 article comprehensive civil code covering all aspects of civil and business life in China.
Okay.
And this is the first civil code we've ever had. And
so,
marriage law,
obviously there were rules before that. They weren't
there are
like
many
a
different
comprehensive code.
They're not combined into one. That's called a civil code.
Okay. Interesting.
There's business laws, there's marriage laws, which marriage law is what we're talking about today. And it's going to become effective in 2021. And it became a much discussed topic on Chinese social media.
Okay.
It is interesting because although it had added several, for example, China has never had a waiting period for divorce before.
Okay.
And this law has added it for a 30-day waiting period. And that is very much a hot topic. Some people are for it, some people are against it.
Talking about politics and things isn't illegal in China, right? Like it doesn't really get censored all that often. It's more of, I think, just some certain hot button issues get censored, and also calls to action, I think, are...
Calls to action. Well, it depends on what you're talking about, because everyone has opinions, and if it's the marriage law, it's not about what's legal about the Communist Party being in charge of the country. If you talk about that, that's not going to be okay.
Or like what's happening to, in Xinjiang province or whatever.
Exactly. But if you can totally talk about why you don't think it's good to have a 30-day waiting period. I don't think it's good, but that's my opinion.
Okay.
So anyhow, this through all this, I became interested in the history of Chinese marriage laws.
Okay.
And through my research, or small time research, I actually think this 2020 edition of the new marriage law is not that big of a jump from the previous laws.
Okay.
And China had several really big jumps between the late 19th century to today.
Yeah.
And there are several stages where, the changes in this law, in 2020, obviously, will affect a lot of people. But really, I thought the changes that happened beforehand was very interesting, and it's worth discussing.
China of the past 150 years has had so many just whiplashes back and forth of culture.
Yeah.
I mean, everything had to change, right? I mean, right? Sometimes within a couple of years, you had to change everything about how you dress, how you talk.
A lot has happened in China in the past 200 years, let's say. It was 5,000 years of nothing. I mean, it's not nothing. We'll go into this is a history podcast, so obviously it was not nothing.
Yeah.
But you could say that it was 5,000 years of just sitting there. And then comes the past 200 years, and society has had massive upheavals. Yeah. So I want to talk about it. In my eyes, I think the history of Chinese history in the past, let's say 150 years, could be divided into several distinctive stages. And the first stage would connect to the oldest, marriage traditions and everything. So, which is what I call marriage in the Imperial Dynasties.
Okay.
So this would be marriages in China, the law, the culture of it, before the establishment of the Republic of China. Not the People's Republic of China, in the early 20th century.
If you don't know anything about Chinese history, but you click on this, you're sort of interested on marriage laws. 150 years ago, China was an imperial system ruled by
an emperor.
And then it became a republic. And then...
in 1912.
And then the Fire Nation attacked. The Japanese attacked. And then we had communism. And now we have socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Yeah.
And all of those are vastly different periods with different rules.
Yes. So this would be before that all happened.
Okay.
So the first stage.
Yeah.
Marriages in the Imperial Dynasties.
Okay.
Traditionally, Chinese marriages had often been arranged or forced. And when I say often, I mean almost all the time. Concubinage, the practice of keeping a concubine, was very common.
Okay. What am I?
You're supposed to ask, what's a concubine?
Oh, what's a concubine?
Say it again.
What's a concubine?
So a concubine is like a mistress
Okay.
who lives with you.
Okay.
And she's not a wife. She can produce heirs for you, but she's not a wife.
So she's like a full-time side chick.
Exactly.
All right.
Yes.
So she can produce heirs.
She could.
Okay. Because I know it's interesting because obviously one of the issues always with European politics. Mm-hmm. What happens if you don't have any sons?
Yeah, you will marry more women. In China, you would marry more women.
Yeah, Europe, you couldn't really easily do that unless you're like Henry VIII, because the Pope wouldn't let you. But I guess in China, if you have 15 concubines...
Well, 15 would be a large number.
Yeah.
The emperor would have 15, of them, but...
But if you have 5, you'll probably get a son in there somewhere.
Yes, exactly. So actually I think the number one purpose of concubinage, besides like serving at the pleasure of man, would be to produce more heir. And your wife obviously is supposed to produce an heir for you, a male heir, let me say, because women aren't, we're not heirs.
No.
Not even persons.
Was there still foot binding at this point?
Yes, there was.
Okay, so can't let the concubines run away. So you gotta snap their feet in half.
Yes, right? So if your wife cannot produce any male children for you, and sometimes you would even have concubines before you have an official wife.
Okay.
Because the concubine might be of low birth.
Yeah.
And came from a different class. She's
you
not a wife material.
You got to keep that spot open for like a political wife or something,
exactly.
Right?
And in a case where you have a wife and she does not produce any male children for you, but your concubines do, you could also promote your concubine and divorce your wife. So,
so you can fire your wife basically.
Yes.
And get a new wife.
Exactly. So this was very common.
How well off would you have to be a concubine? Like, could you
I would
be a
imagine
peasant?
you would sort of have to be middle class, or you have to own some land.
Okay.
Because you're right. So like when we said peasants in Chinese history is just things just happen to them, right? And they don't have any land, they don't have money. But if you are a middle class or higher status in society, you have extra money laying around to just feed a bigger family for the sole purpose of producing more heir and for your own pleasure.
Yeah, I read one place that part of the whole thing with the whole foot binding was sort of like a flex, because if you were poor, you couldn't afford to cripple your wife's feet because you need her to help you.
Your children are labor.
Your wife is labor too.
Well, right? No, you would have to do... Oh, no, foot binding starts very, very young. You can't start when they're in their 20s.
Oh, okay. So either way, though, right? You wouldn't want a wife with bound feet if you were on a farm.
I imagine
or children,
so, yeah.
Right? But if you had money, then you don't need your wives to work.
Or like peasants don't get to have wives. Women are property. Of course, they're taken up by the man with more power and money.
Okay.
You have to have some money and status in society to have a concubine.
Okay.
Some other Chinese characteristics of marriages. So women could not seek divorce. This include concubines.
Okay.
They cannot leave their owner at this point, or their husband if you're a wife. But the husband can divorce the wife.
Okay.
It's literally called 休妻, means like fire the wife. So you could fire your wife.
Was there like
so a great time for
or
women.
Anything, or
no?
You just kick them out in the street?
Yeah.
Okay.
The exchange of betrothal gifts, which is from the groom's family to the bride's family, and dowry, which is from the bride's family to the groom's family, during this time was very common as well.
Okay.
Marriage was more like a contract between families rather than what it is between two individuals.
Well, it's like you're exchanging a piece of property.
Exactly.
You've got a daughter. He needs a concubine. You need a new plow or something, trade agreement or something.
Yes. So great times for women. And throughout the Chinese history, during the imperial times, because we had many dynasties come and go, but these traditions haven't really changed all that much.
Okay.
And in 1912, the Qing Dynasty, the last Imperial Dynasty that we know of, hopefully there will be no more, being abolished, and the Republic of China is born. Ideally, this would be a new age.
Okay.
Because it's a republic now.
Yeah.
However, it was not until 1930 that the Republic of China's Nanjing government released its first official marriage law.
Well, they kind of had some.
Yeah,
stuff
they had
going on.
they had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And Japan was here. Communism was was birthing.
Mm-hmm.
So to their credit, I guess they had some more problems to deal with. But in 1930, they had released their first official marriage law, which I would call a step in the right direction.
So, on paper at least, at this point, China was a republic, even though it was more like a military dictatorship.
Yeah.
Could women vote for things?
No. No one could vote for things. Let's just leave it
It's
like
a republic where whatever Sun Yat-sen or whatever Chiang Kai-shek says
it's a
happens,
republic of the warlords.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, they really tried hard, to drag China kicking and screaming
into the modern
ages, and from many, many years of 5,000, just in case you didn't know, of imperial dynasties. I mean, it's a hard job. Okay. It's a hard job. So, anyways, which might also be an excuse to why they didn't release a marriage law to liberate women
until 1930.
So, in 1930, they released its first official marriage law. The reason I call it as a step into the right direction is because it had some, you could say, radical changes compared to the old.
Anything's pretty radical compared
any
to
change
women
is
are
radical
property
at this point,
and
right?
we break their feet so they can't run away.
Exactly. First, there's no more forced marriages.
Okay.
On paper, at least. Okay? And the minimum age for marriage is officially established. For male is 18, for female is 16. Exceptions could be approved by legal guardians.
Okay.
So your parents could say, yeah, she's 12, she could get married.
She's 12, but
That's
she's really mature for a 12.
Yeah, right. I'm her legal guardian, and I.
Yeah.
So bigamy was not allowed anymore, which means no more concubinage. However, it is not a secret that powerful men would have
mistresses,
concubines.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think probably at that point, though, it's like you have less legal power over them, right? Like if you have a concubine and they run away or something,
Well, I think if you're a warlord,
I guess you can do whatever you want.
You can, yeah.
Okay, but
I don't want to say execute her, but you could do whatever you want.
But the intent was to bring it more in line of what we would call
on paper.
Like
we
Western...
no longer have the average Joe can no longer have concubine.
All right,
unless you're a select few very powerful men in the nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
yeah. So
and also no forced marriages. That's good too.
Yes, and divorce is allowed. So women can't say that they want a divorce. And
so the women can initiate it.
They could.
Yeah, okay.
Husbands get the children by default, unfortunately.
Well, I wonder if if you're living in a patriarchal society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and the husbands are the only ones who can really have most jobs. And
they can pay the woman.
Yeah, I know, but
that's an excuse.
I know, but
no, but I think you're right. So if the woman is a property and the children are also property, of course the property will stay with its owner.
Yeah,
which is the man, the father.
Yeah, and I think it makes it less likely that you can just kick the woman out with the kids and get a new family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I actually wanted to kind of make a point. I don't know if you're going to talk about it, but I feel like China's interesting because we talk about the patriarchy in, like America and Europe and stuff, but it's like in China, I mean, it was patriarchy with like a capital P, right? Like the eldest, the eldest.
I think it's in general just like East Asian countries.
Yeah.
The whole Confucius culture, any country that's heavily influenced by this lineage of culture.
Because not only is the patriarch like let's say like a father or a grandfather, the patriarch can be the patriarch of like multiple families, right? Of multiple like side families or branch families.
They would all be the one family though at this point.
So it's like a little almost like little feudal. Each family is like a little feudal clan. Yeah. So I mean, I think in that sense, this is very revolutionary, right? Trying to kind of slightly at least break that up.
Well, sure. I'm not that.
You're not that enthused about the
No.
1930s?
No.
All right.
Okay. Let me do the disclaimer that I was going to do at the beginning, but I forgot. Even though we're talking about marriage laws, and I cannot deny that marriages, despite my personal opinions on this institution, it is an important part of society in really any country in the world today, right? So society is still at that stage, and changes in marriages are interesting because they reflect changes in society.
Yeah.
And political systems and culture.
Yeah.
So even though I think no one should get married, scratch that. I think the option of not getting married, like getting married should not be the norm. That should not be, cause today is still the norm. Come on, right?
Yeah.
So
you get tax benefits in the U.S.
You get tax benefit. I'm married, by the way. So like, you know, I'm really sort of like a champagne socialist talking about this. And I think in a patriarchal society where women don't have equal rights, marriage is an institution to take advantage of women at large.
Well, I mean,
think.
you could argue either way, right? I mean, not to be the Christian Marriage Defense Council over here.
I think you're about to be.
No, I just think it's like, it's almost like women in China, for the most part, in the imperial period, were slaves. You know, they're basically property,
Yes,
right?
yes.
The North, the Union, when they won the Civil War, didn't really spend enough time trying to really solve the problem of like, now these people are free, so like, how do they support themselves, right?
Okay.
And so they basically got drawn back into like sharecropping and all these really unequal arrangements because the plantation owners still had all the capital and everything.
Yeah.
Right. So obviously it's better than being a slave, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. So I do think to a certain extent, some of these things, maybe like, the men get the children. And I mean, if you've had 5,000 years of women can't learn skills and jobs and stuff, you can't just throw them out on the street and be like, compete in the job market. It's a free market.
And you say you hate the West Wing.
Why is that a practical idealism?
That's a practical. That's a quote. We gotta do this inches by inches.
Yeah.
Quote. Yeah.
Okay. Well, forced marriage. No. Concubinage,
okay.
Those are big
We'll give the
steps.
government some credit because we always. You want to be soft on
We're
the government.
going to get to if I know anything about history, I know we're going to get to some radical changes pretty soon. In about 20 years. So then we can hear about
what's real radical.
Yeah, some real radical societal changes.
Okay, so there's a few more items in here for this step in the right direction.
Okay.
So divorce is now allowed. However, female cannot get remarried within 6 months of the divorce, but men can. Well, there's no mentioning of men cannot.
Okay.
So I don't understand why, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
And alimony was mentioned, but only if you're not at fault. So if you cheated on your husband or your wife, I'm guessing your wife wouldn't give you alimony anyways because you would be the one with the property.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay.
So on paper, where we're going, but
China's a pretty torn up place.
It was a very torn up place. There was a civil war that's about to happen. Obviously, Japan was about to invade.
Yeah. I mean, one could argue it was about 50 years of civil wars.
Oh yeah.
From the Boxer Rebellion to Mao taking over in 1950, it was kind of just uninterrupted. Just warlords.
The war never really stopped.
Yeah.
In China, in the first half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
So that's it's different from the Imperial Dynasties now. We are in a new time.
Okay.
And then fast forward to 1949. Dun, dun, dun. The People's Republic of China
has been formed.
And unlike the Republic of China, the People's Republic of China...
What was like the Republic of China from the People's Republic of China? I think if you drew a Venn diagram of those two things, they would have like the only part of the intersection would be like involves Chinese people and is in China. I think would kind of.
I'll tell you what, in neither of them people have the votes. But
okay, that's true.
They're both republics.
Yeah, where no one can really vote.
Yeah, so. I mean, there's a legal definition of what it means that people have the votes or not. Obviously, we have the People's Congress and we have people's representatives.
Cherry, you live in China. Did anybody cast any votes? So anyway.
So let's not talk about that because I would just about start crying. I'm kidding. So in 1949, the People's Republic of China is born. Mm-hmm. And swiftly after the People's Republic of China has been established in 1949, mm-hmm. the marriage law was enacted.
Okay.
Within the year. So in 1950, this was official. So 1949, the republic was born.
Yeah.
In 1950, the marriage law was the first law released by the government, by the central government.
I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, people want to get married. They need to know what the rules are.
Exactly. Well, I would say there are some other reasons why this was a high priority.
Okay. Interesting.
Other than, the Republic of China didn't sort of put it that high on the list. Mm-hmm. So the drafting process of this particular law started in 1948 officially, before the PRC was even born. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the work was led by the Central Women's Committee, 中央妇女委员会, later called the National Women's Committee. They changed the name, I think, because there was no nation yet in 1948, so they could only call it the Central Women's Committee. But anyhow, this is the Women's Committee. Okay?
Yeah.
Of the nation. And
so it's written by women.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I was surprised. So the work was led by Deng Yingchao, the chairwoman of the Central Women's Committee. She was also married to Zhou Enlai, the first premier of the PRC, the right-hand man of Mao.
Yeah.
And we got to do an episode on him at some point.
The not crazy guy.
I don't know.
You don't like Zhou Enlai?
Well,
I mean, he kind of went along with everything, but
yeah,
he's kind of like, no.
The cult of personality of Mao.
Yeah.
He would be the first worshiper. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. He has an image of being sane and sort of like
calm,
kept a steady hand, but he didn't stop Cultural Revolution from happening.
True. He wasn't enabling.
He minimized some damages, I think.
Yeah.
But
it's like somebody in a relationship
it's complicated.
It's like somebody in a relationship with an alcoholic, and they're like, oh man, they're drunk again, and they get them like in the shower and clothes on and get them to work so they don't lose their job, and like they keep it together, right?
They don't just send them to rehab.
No.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a complicated situation, but yeah, these are important people in the form of the republic with power. So these people drafted, the law. And as far as I can tell, what you asked, the named participants who drafted this law, the ones that, have names in the history books, they're all women. Before going into the details, though, of this new marriage law, I do want to mention that it actually draws lineage from another marriage law released 20-something years ago in 1930s. But no, it is not the official marriage law by the Republic of China.
Okay.
The official government then. So little did I know, because I didn't know this, there was this thing. It's called the Chinese Soviet Republic. Have you heard of it?
Okay, was that like one of the little tiny communist little pockets?
Yeah, in China.
Okay.
So it was a short-lived, unrecognized nation established by Mao Zedong and Zhu De during the Chinese Civil War.
Okay.
It only existed for like 6-7 years. Geographically, it occupied a very small part of China. Several towns, really. But, it would be the mountainous parts of Jiangxi and Fujian province. And within those short-lived years of this republic, they had a marriage law. They had a lot of laws, actually, because they were like, we got to do this for real.
Yeah.
This is gonna be our nation.
It's like this podcast, Jerry. You got to fake it till you make it.
Right? Exactly. So, supposedly, the Chinese Soviet Republic's view on the marriage was a much more radical version than the marriage law published by the then official government of China just a couple years earlier. But of course, what you call these, today we see that it's more radical because the Chinese, the history is written by the winners. The details of this law. So in 1931, this was a regulation, and in 1934, it became an official law. And it was actually enforced in the occupied region of the Chinese Soviet Republic.
So if you were two ardent communists and you wanted to get married,
you are subjects of this law.
Okay. And I wonder if it's
subjected
also
to the law.
why don't we talk about what the law is, because I kind of wonder like if it's because it could also be sort of like a big, I mean, again, this is to bring back the Civil War, like one of the things with the Emancipation Proclamation, was everywhere they went, the Union armies, all the slaves got freed. So it's like if the communists roll up in a village and they go
they gotta free the women.
Yeah, right.
They gotta free half of the people.
So those
the
people
labor
can be
force.
good communists.
I think that's exactly why, because the Communist Party was going for a much more radical, for using this word again, but they were really trying to destroy a social structure, the patriarchal structure.
Yeah.
The nation needs to be, the whole society needs to be turned upside down.
When you look at Chinese history, lots of people take over China, right? Like it's a place where lots of people roll in and take it over, but nothing really changes for the most part, right? Like somebody can come in and break a dynasty and they become the new dynasty, but China just kind of keeps on rolling, right? As a nation.
Yeah.
As you said, the kind of whole thing with that stayed, the concubinage and all the kind of things that almost stayed the same for thousands of years. What are you saying?
Mao was like, no.
Yeah, right. It's
not this time.
Yeah, it's not enough to take over China, I think, in Mao's view.
They go like changes habits in stages.
Yeah.
No, Mao's like, no, we're not going to keep a steady hand.
We're going to burn down this house.
We're going to burn it all down.
And make a new house.
Yeah, exactly. So the radical content of the 1930 law by the Chinese Soviet Republic says any forms of betrothal, gifts, or dowry are abolished. Any forms. Okay? And freedom of divorce is granted no matter if both parties agree or not.
Okay.
If one party says they want a divorce, it will be proceeded.
All right. So they just walk away.
Well, so you do have to, even though it was very small occupied regions in China, just some towns, right? But also mostly in the rural area. But in order to get married and get divorced, you do have to report to the local Chinese Soviet Republic government.
Okay.
Well, what are they gonna? They're not gonna go. They're revolutionaries. They're comrades. They're not gonna go to the
Imperial,
official government. Yeah.
Or the public. So basically, Mao rolls in. You're like, you know what? Screw this. I'm out. You leave your husband.
Yeah.
You go find a party official.
Yeah.
You join the revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I'm in.
I think it was very, very useful tactics, by the way. So after the divorce, each party's own land assets that are to be dealt with by themselves. So if you've been married for more than a year, then the increased asset gains through working together as a team during that time will be divided equally.
Okay.
If you took out debt while living together, the man is responsible for it. But not the profit. The profit is shared both equally. The children are primarily the responsibilities of men. However, if both parents are willing to take the children, the woman will get it. Unless the child is still a baby and needs to be breastfed, then the mother must take it.
Okay.
So basically, unless it's a baby, it's the mother's choice whether they want it or not.
All right.
When the children goes to the mother, the father must pay for 2/3 of the living expenses of the children until they're 16. And if the mother gets remarried, if the new husband is willing to take responsibilities for the original children from the previous marriage, the father will be off the hook.
So that's more radical than we have today, right?
Yeah.
In the United States or China
yes.
or whatever else.
Yes. Communism is still radical today. But we actually had practiced it for,
Yeah,
So as a background, Mao actually, I found this decision paper that Mao had wrote. It's called a 决议 in Chinese. So I think it's more like a commentary and sort of like an informative. So I only have a Chinese version of, so I'm just going to try to translate it. But basically he wrote, under the imperial ruling, the marriages between a man and a woman is barbaric and dehumanizing. A woman's the suppression and pain the woman suffers is only more so than a man. Only when, not if, he was very confident, only when the revolution is victorious and men and women of the society are liberated as a first step economically, the marriage relation and relationships between a man and woman will become free. I guess that he means like equal to.
Yeah.
So at the moment, in the Chinese Soviet Republic, we have the foundation of freedom of marriage. And we're going, this is a stepping stone. We're going from here. And then he said, for women who are only just liberated from the suppression of the imperial ruling, their body and their minds, he said their body had suffered greatly. For example, foot binding.
Okay.
He actually listed it. And they have not recovered. Therefore, they cannot become independent financially yet. Therefore, in the matter of a divorce, we are lenient towards protecting the women. And the financial matters and the responsibilities and the duties that, are raised because of a divorce are to be taken up by the men.
Okay. So sort of like affirmative action, but for marriages.
Exactly. So this marriage law was highly political and radical, right? It had the ambition of abolishing the traditional patriarchal family system. Patriarchal family system. And therefore, achieving the goal of freeing and mobilizing women to join and support the revolutionary cause. So I thought that was the motivation, right? Why this must be a front and center issue for the CCP.
Yeah.
Versus to the KMT, the KMTs, because they are relying on the military force of all the various warlords.
Yeah.
And it's not about breaking a patriarchal society. And in Mao's case, it was about that, right? So. Well,
I also think even though it's a rather, female-focused law, right? I mean, one of the things also can be that if you're a poor dude, right, and you join the revolution, right, you can get a wife. You meet a cute girl. That
goes to like a patriarchal society hurts everyone.
I mean, it really hurts.
Besides the select few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's. I mean,
men or women.
That's really. I mean, this is completely off topic, but that's always the thing that annoys me when people act like feminism is somehow like anti-men. It's like, no. Do you know who gets hurt by patriarchy? Like a real patriarchy, like how China was. It's men, because I mean, you have like a family with like 50 dudes in it.
Yeah.
And they're all under the control of one
the
guy.
Father, yeah.
And so it's like, I mean,
but if they had the hope of becoming the father one day.
I know, right?
And then
I guess
continue the cycle.
That's like, yeah. But if you're a poor guy, you join the revolution.
Yeah.
You meet a cute girl, you can get married. You don't have to ask anybody's
parents. You don't have to worry about money.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about you're revolutionaries. You're
Yeah.
Yeah.
How romantic,
exactly.
Cherry.
100%. Yeah. How romantic. Well, wait for it. It's about to become less romantic very soon. So let's go to the 1950s law, right?
Okay.
Which draws its straight lineage from this 1930s law in the party's language, like in the party's propaganda today. They mention themselves, so we're taking it. We're taking their words. And the 1950s law swiftly passed. And here's some more details besides the ones that we've already mentioned. So the first chapter, the first note in the first point in the first chapter, called Principles, denounces the anything traditional about the marriage system in China. And it emphasizes on the freedom of marriage, on one husband, one wife, and equal rights for men and women, and the protection of women and children. And obviously, we're not that radical yet. It still mentions it's a one husband and one wife. Because, we
gotta make more. We gotta make more communists.
Babies. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyhow, we
gotta take back Taiwan, Cherry.
Yeah, I know.
We gotta push the Americans out of Korea. More babies.
Exactly.
More communists.
Exactly. They did one of those things. So you cannot have concubines, obviously, and you cannot get married multiple times. You cannot have a child bride, and you cannot interfere with a widow's freedom to get married, to remarry.
All right.
You got to produce more babies.
Yeah.
And it is banned to seek assets and properties and cash, anything marriage related when it comes to marriages.
All right.
So I guess that obviously bans the equal playing field, and then money's not a thing.
Yeah.
Because obviously we'll talk about Mao and money and economies like soon, but you know what I mean, like and the concept properties. But But yeah, so there will be no exchange of hands of properties in the case of a marriage. No gifting, no nothing. Okay, you're just
people.
You're comrades. You're revolutionaries.
Comrades, yes.
Okay, so the legal age of marriage goes up to 20 years for men and 18 for women.
Interesting. Probably Mao was thinking, I mean, when they raised it to 20, they're probably like, well, we're going to want these guys in the army.
Yes.
For like a couple of years, right? And once they get married, you know, it's harder to get them. So, you know, we'll make it a little higher so that we can use them longer.
Yes. It does mention marriages for revolutionaries.
Oh, okay.
So just wait for it. But in the chapter where it says who can get married and who cannot get married, I thought this was interesting because it specifically lists that if you're someone who has if you cannot have sex,
okay,
if you're unable to perform the act of sex,
okay,
you cannot get married. And
you mean like biologically, not just if you're really unskilled at it?
No, I guess if you can't get it up.
Okay.
But how would they know? But I guess you know. You know what I mean?
So I guess old people can't get married. They don't have Viagra.
Interesting.
If your first wife dies and you're 60.
Yeah, so maybe they didn't want old people to get married. I don't know. I mean, they were always going for the young people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Old people are getting killed.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so when we say that this is radical, we're not talking about this is liberal. But I mean, this is the example I thought that how the power of the government at this point under the CCP goes into your bedrooms.
Oh yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter if you love someone, whatever. They're like, well, if you cannot, I'm guessing that this was, what do you call it? The motivation here is so that it's because marriage is a unit to produce more little comrades, right?
Yeah.
Children for the republic. So what's the point if you can't, you know what I mean? You better give the wife to someone else, you know what I mean? Or the man. I don't know.
Every family's a factory.
Exactly.
Steel in the backyard.
You must be productive.
Comrades in the bedroom.
Right? So when I am praising what this law is doing to the women's rights in China, you cannot really ignore that. That also means the government has its tentacles in all other aspects of your life as well, right? Mm-hmm. So anyways, so you can't get married, and if you have, is there such a law in America that you can't get married if you have diseases? Oh,
I mean, not as much anymore.
Right.
There have always been laws in a lot of places. You know, marriages. I mean, you could think of the Red Wedding, right? Where
what's the Red Wedding?
Robb Stark goes up and, you know, to seal the deal, and then they kill everybody in Game of Thrones. But a lot of marriages in ancient times in various cultures, it didn't count as actually being real until it was consummated. So like on the wedding night, they'd have to, you know, do the business. And if it didn't happen for some reason, then you could argue like, I'm not really married, right? We didn't actually do the deed.
Right.
So that's one thing, right?
Okay.
And that's kind of normal. But the U.S., I'm sure you've heard this term, had this whole thing with eugenics for like 100 years or probably more like 50 years. Well, basically after Darwin came out, there was all these people who thought like, well, you know, with modern medicine and all these things, all these people are surviving and having kids that otherwise wouldn't survive. So it's making the gene pool worse. Okay. And so we need to sterilize or don't allow people to marry who we think are bad races, not intelligent.
So they're selectively breeding people.
Well, they kind of tried to, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, there are laws like that. I mean, not necessarily anymore because, I mean, we've sort of, in the U.S. now, marriage is much more of a business deal than any other goal. I mean, it's for tax and legal reasons, you know. So
it's not for love.
I mean, it's for love too.
Yeah. Okay, so we're not alone in this.
No, it's not unheard of.
It's just an example of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have sexually transmitted diseases, or if you have mental diseases that's not cured, or if you have mafeng, what was the name of it? Yeah, if you have leprosy, you also cannot get married.
Okay.
I'm guessing leprosy was still a big problem in China then because they specifically listed it. Who knows? So that's about who can and cannot get married.
Okay.
And when you can get married. And there is a chapter about rights and duties between husbands and wives.
Okay.
Okay. And first, it said a couple are partners of a life shared. So they have equal standing in the family.
Oh, how romantic of Mao.
Yeah, right. And both parties have the freedom to choose the career, to join the workforce, and to participate in societal activities.
Okay.
Meaning to join the revolution, I think. And both parties have equal rights to truly deal with the family properties.
Okay.
Manage the family properties.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And both parties have the right to use their own last names. So women in old China don't have names.
Well, they have like, hey, you. I mean, they have like first names basically, right?
Well, interestingly, so yes, officially they do have first names. However, women oftentimes will only be referred to. So before she gets married, she has her own name, right?
Okay.
After she gets married, she will have, her name will be her original last name plus her new last name, and that's it.
Oh, wow.
That's
okay.
her name. That's who she is, right? That's so yeah. So up until this point, only really in New China, women stop changing their last names to after they get married.
Okay.
And up until 90s, I think up until now, because when I was growing up, I don't remember anyone's mother, parents have
the same last names.
It's uncommon that they would change their last names. Women would change their last names for the man. Yeah.
And so this started at this point, right?
Yeah, it started at this point.
Okay. Interesting.
So I thought it was always, in my mind, it was just always normal that
women
why
would
you
keep
change
their
your last name?
Last name, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously then I come to America and it's like...
What last name do the kids normally get?
Well, interestingly, the fathers.
Okay.
So a revolution is not total yet.
Well, actually, didn't you tell me though that one of your relatives,
my mother's last name is my grandmother's.
Okay.
Is her mother's last name.
So your mother got her grandmother's name.
Yeah,
or her
she has
name.
sisters, and all her other siblings have my grandfather's last name.
Okay.
But she has my grandmother's last name.
What a feminist.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's about equal rights between partners in a marriage.
Okay.
Okay. And then there's a chapter about parents and children. So parents have the duty to educate and raise the children. Children also have the rights to the duties to financially support their parents. And it says neither parties can abuse each other.
Okay.
So no child abuse or parents abuse, I guess. Senior abuse.
Yeah.
At this point. Infanticide by drowning act is banned.
Okay.
I'm assuming this was a big problem in China, especially for baby girls.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, right?
Well, I mean, it's a big problem now.
Yeah, don't remind me. Yeah, but they listed it, so apparently, I guess maybe that's the number one way of killing a baby or something.
Well, you could always just say, oops, I dropped it.
You could, right? So, I dropped it. Yeah. Yeah, so in the 1950s law about divorce, if one of the parties would like a divorce, so this is a step back from the original law in 1930 by the Chinese Soviet Republic, because in that law it said it doesn't matter what the reason is, just if one party wants to get divorced, they get divorced. Here it added that if one party insists on getting a divorce but not the other party, the people's government will try to not negotiate, what do you call it?
Like mediate. Okay.
Yeah, will try to mediate. And if it is not effective, they will be granted a divorce.
Okay.
So there's one more step here, right?
So Communist Party comrades also have to be marriage counselors.
Exactly.
All right.
So besides that...
That'd be a real good period TV show.
What?
Communist marriage counselor. Right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a real good period TV show?
That would...
Traveling from village to village.
I don't know if they travel.
Little Communist Party comrade.
Yeah.
Got your little Mao-suit on.
Exactly.
Hear people's marriage problems.
I don't know if that's a job. Like the traveling salesman or like the doctor.
I'm just imagining it would be cool.
I know. Sure. Why don't you think about that? Okay. That could be our other...
Because they could be like the barefoot doctor too. They could be like a doctor.
They could be a barefoot doctor.
Barefoot doctor, marriage problems.
Is barefoot doctor solely Chinese term or it's a...
I think it is a Chinese term.
Really? How did you know about it?
Because I've heard the translation before.
For whom?
I don't know. I listened to a thing on Mao's Barefoot Doctors.
Okay.
It was a thing basically saying that, people like the
No,
Western.
I know what barefoot doctor is.
I know, but for anybody listening, so basically, after the revolution, Western educated doctors were extremely rare, and then beyond that, and also medicine was very rare, and also both of those things were often actively targeted by communists, right? Because those people, if you had enough money to be Western educated and to have Western medicine, you probably had money. So Mao basically created a book, not Mao personally, I don't think, but the Communist Party created a book to distribute everywhere, which is like, okay, this is how you treat a fever, this is how you treat a broken bone, this is how you treat diarrhea. And in the actual version, it also been like, well, if they have a fever, you give them aspirin. And then it's like, well, if you don't have aspirin, you give them this twig, right? You grind up this lizard and you put it in a tea. But the version that most Western people have seen cuts out all the Western medicine, and it just has on all the Asian mystical crap, not realizing that it's like, that's only in there because it's better than nothing, right? But not that Mao had determined that somehow the ancient wonders of Chinese medicine are better than modern medicine.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a side note. And they're called barefoot doctors.
I just imagine, because if you were Mao,
Yeah.
or if you were the CCP at this point,
Yeah.
so you hate the traditional Chinese culture or anything old, right?
Yeah.
You hate all of it. So you don't like traditional Chinese medicine either.
Yeah.
But you also hate modern science
Well,
because you.
Yeah, I guess you do kind of hate modern science.
Yeah, they hate modern science.
Because they didn't even like Soviet science.
No.
They didn't like the Soviet advisors who would come over and like tell them this is what you should be doing. They're
Yeah.
like, no, screw you. We'll make steel in our backyard.
Yeah, and then fast forward to like Cultural Revolution. The doctors are the missionaries of Western capitalism.
Yeah.
Because they went to medical school. So what do you do at this point? You just don't have doctors, I guess.
Well, I guess it was
traditional or modern medicine.
Well, the barefoot doctors things was kind of pragmatic,
I know, yeah, true. So now it comes to the revolutionaries. So for a revolutionary soldier who is in active duty, and if they are in communication with their family, the exception to divorce is that if their spouse, who is not the revolutionary soldier, wants a divorce, the revolutionary soldier must agree.
Okay.
And I know I keep saying revolutionary soldier, but that's literally what it says. It doesn't say a soldier. It says 革命军人, a revolutionary soldier.
Well, everyone's a revolutionary.
I know,
everything.
but you have to emphasize, right?
Okay, so if they're out in Korea getting bombed,
Yeah,
then you
can't divorce them.
Okay, interesting.
And it does say that if you haven't talked to them for 2 years and they're gone, you can't find them, then you can get a divorce. Presumably they're dead. But I think this was to obviously to
reassure
soldiers
that their wives are going to leave them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So besides that, it kept other things about like how during the time of shared life, and if they took out debt to pay for the lifestyle. There was no lifestyle in China, but if there was, the man in the event of a divorce, the man is responsible for it.
Okay.
If you took out debt alone, then you're responsible for it. But I think there was, they kept some of it where they, in the spirit of women, were suppressed, and then let's give them an easier time. So that was the quote radical, law, Chinese marriage law of 1950. That law was in place for 30 years. Okay. Only in 1980, China had a new marriage law.
I wonder what happened around that time, where maybe they start changing the laws. Did anybody die, maybe? Did anything end?
Let's just say the country also had other priorities. But okay, but just before we move on to the 1980s law, the 1950s law was very essential, I thought, because if they didn't have this law, and also this law was, the enforcement of this law needed constant propaganda support. Had a lot of campaigns, because you're literally ripping a system out of the heart of a culture.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And the Communist Party can't do a lot of things they did after 1950 if this law wasn't in place, if the patriarchal society hadn't actually been sort of smashed.
Well, the way I like to think of it, like these kind of Asian, East Asian kind of patriarchal systems, is it's almost like everybody in the whole family, besides the oldest male, kind of almost has the legal status of like a 14-year-old would in like an American family, right?
Yes.
Even if you're 50.
Oh, today you do.
Oh yeah, today, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're 3 generations out, the patriarch can still decide like who you get to marry, what you're going to do.
Yeah.
They decide all
They
that.
still play a part in your life.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to completely smash all that because otherwise you can't have, that's partially why, Mao's against things like, religion and drugs and, ancient Chinese culture because he doesn't want
anything that's not the party.
Yeah, right? He doesn't want any competing ideologies, right? Any other sources of authority besides the party.
Exactly.
Because, he needs to retrain China into what he thinks China should be.
Yes. And when I said that a lot of things wouldn't happen, I don't mean those are good things.
Oh, yeah.
So for example, land reform in China, which I really want to do an episode on at one point, was very brutal. Was just bloody hell, right? And if a song can, you know what I mean? Like if the patriarchal society wasn't broken down, he could not have done the land reform all over China.
Oh, yeah.
He could not have, we couldn't have the Cultural Revolution per se, right? All these political campaigns would have much more resistance. If your parents goes, now you're not doing that.
Yeah, it's harder to do land reform when you're patriarchy, when everybody, when half the people in a village might be part of one giant family unit, right? Yeah. But if you smash that apart, and now everybody's individual marriages or whatever, now it's like it's open season, right? Now you can smash the rest of it too.
Exactly, right? So it was about class struggle. It was about the society was turned upside down. Yeah. And this law played a very important part in that process. I guess like what we said in the past episodes, like to train a country, to train a society and its people. Yeah. That the revolution cause is your ideology and nothing else. Yeah. Right. Whatever your father says, whatever your parents said,
they're wrong.
No. Yeah. Right. The party is your god. Yes. The party is your patriarchal. Yeah. So.
And in some ways, obviously, you look at Imperial China. It wasn't a fun place for most people, right? Like it was it
was a fun place for some people.
Well, 50% of those people are women, so automatically, no, it's not fun.
Yeah, for 50%. So that's one thing to debate because obviously, women's rights in China at this point. Okay, let's just say first, human rights in China at this point is just non-existent, right? Yeah. However, though, this is the time in China where you don't, as a woman, you are not necessarily treated worse than a man. You're both treated very terribly. Yeah. But at least it's not worse than a man necessarily because you're a woman all that much. Yeah, so it's a complicated thing, right? Yeah. So like,
obviously China's a rough place, but I don't know if it's really
was a rough place.
Yeah, it is a rough place, but I don't know if you can really say whether or not communist China, even with all the stuff that's going to happen, is worse than Imperial China. I don't really know which one I'd rather live in.
Well, I think today we're sort of going backwards a little. There's some, steps we're taking. Where Mao would not be happy. So when you say communist China,
you really Maoist China.
Yeah, right. China under Mao. Yeah. Still, I don't want to say anything good about it.
Oh no.
It's a.
Yeah. But it's. It is different for you because it's your history, right? It's your people, it's your families. For me, it's more like from a history book, right? Mm-hmm, like it's a little bit more detached from me because.
It's also detached from me because I wouldn't even know about these things if I didn't. It was kept away from me.
Well, people don't like to talk. I don't think people like to talk about it.
We don't need to talk about it. Yeah, we don't like to talk about it. Not that we don't like to talk about. We're not encouraged to talk about it. Mm. So anyway, 30 years fast forward, a lot of things happened. This law contributed to those things. Mm-hmm. We're now at 1980. Cultural Revolution have wrapped up. Okay. And the society is trying to, get it all back together. Yeah. We're trying to keep it together, and the party is also trying to keep it together so it could, because Cultural Revolution, like say, some would say it almost ruined the party, and it's standing China. So as part of the effort of keeping it together, the Chinese legal system now is stepping into the new ages as well. So in 1980, there's a new Chinese marriage law. It's coming out as part of many other laws as well, right? So so in this, there are some interesting changes, and a lot of language were deleted from the more radical, quote unquote, laws in 1950. So in this, so I'll talk about a few changes I thought that was interesting. Okay. So first, it mentions the So in the 1980s law, the one-child policy is introduced. And okay, specifically, it's not called the one-child policy. It says family planning in this law. And this is the first time that it's been introduced because obviously in Mao's times, China in the first 30 years, the PRC in the first 30 years, the goal was to produce more children, right?
Yeah.
To prepare for the war that's about to come, to prepare for a permanent revolution. And now it's the 1980s and China is still poor, right? It was 30 years of no economy development. It was 30 years of just the communes, I guess.
Yeah.
And now they're like, okay, so we have an economic problem. How do we solve it?
Yeah.
Have less people,
Yeah.
have less mouths to feed. And how do we do that? Make everyone have one child only. So we can do an episode on this. And so a very terrible, terrible history that I don't really want to research about. But yeah, so now this is a part of the law. Okay. It also, the age to marry has been increased to 22 for men and 20 for women. And to get married later in life and to reproduce later in life should be encouraged.
So that's
set
like
in the law.
So that's like an extension of the one-child policy, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. So this evolves around that, right? And then it also says that children now are, because in the previous law they did say, children are responsible for their parents and they should help them. But now it's very specifically says that if the children do not financially support the parents can have the rights to demand financial support from the children.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and it goes into much detail of like how like this is enforced and what the duty is. And I thought this was sort of because the 30 years before, it's like, who cares about the older generation, the seniors, right? Like we are trying to
build something new
here, right?
Yeah.
But now, obviously, we're trying to step into the new ages, and then there's a problem with all these aging population.
Yeah.
And the government goes, well, it's your problem. You better, right?
Well, it seems like it's a little bit sliding back into the extended family structure thing, right? Of sort of rebuilding those bonds.
It's rebuilding the families back up. Yeah.
I mean, because it's one of those things where, if you have stronger family units, your kid says, I'm going to go become a Red Guard. You say no, right?
Yeah.
No, you're not doing that, right?
Yes.
And if they can't report you and get you, you know what I mean? Then they can't become one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it kind of is stabilizing, right? I mean.
Yeah. And it even goes into details where you go, in the case where the parents are deceased, the grandparents are in charge, are responsible for the raising of the grandchildren. And in the case vice versa, the grandchildren are responsible to financially support their grandparents.
Okay, so we're getting multiple generations again.
So we're really getting like you said, rebuilding the family structure back up.
Not quite patriarchy, but a family structure.
But the state is sort of trying to, like, I guess, obviously goes, well, financially responsible, meaning like the stability of the society needs to be maintained within the family unit, right? But also we're not paying for it. You're paying for it, So, and all the other the parts of the law seem to me was just like, normal, look like a modern marriage law.
Okay.
But not the family planning part, because in America, I guess, of course, you could encourage people to have more children or less, right? You could provide, I don't know, tax relief.
And
you could give tax credits for people with more children or something.
Yeah, which is what we do.
Which is what you do, yes. But so after 1980s, there are several editions of this law until like 2020, we have the civil, what do you call it? The civil Bible,
code or whatever.
Civil code book. But all these were built sort of on top of the 1980s law. Yeah. And in the effort to, deal with the new problems the society could have in process of developing, and sort of try to keep it within the frames of a modern marriage law.
So they've stripped out a lot of like the revolutionary comrade terminology.
Yeah. Oh no, that's. Yeah.
So
it does say that for active duty soldiers, they're no longer revolutionary soldiers. You cannot see the word revolution anywhere in the 1980s law.
But it's sort of interesting though, because it really, obviously Mao hated this stuff, but it makes me think of like, a lot of marriage laws in, Europe and the United States where they originally have all this religious language in them, right? And then they're kind of stripping it out, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it's like in Maoist China, right? The religion was Mao, basically, right? Was the revolution.
Was the revolution,
yeah. So now you kind of got to make it secular. But actually, you left something out, Cherry.
Yeah.
What marriage law did the real China have?
Oh,
the Republic of China.
Yeah, sorry about
Taiwan.
that. Yeah, so the 1930s marriage law by the Nanjing government.
Not the communist law.
Not the communist government. The Nanjing government of the Republic of China.
Okay.
So if you didn't know this, so 1949, New China established, but the old government of China, the Republic of China, escaped to Taiwan and established there. Mm-hmm. And that's why today we go, there's only one China, because even though there's two China, and all these problems where it came from.
You always told me that the cutesy thing was that the area code in like Taipei is like okay, starts with like a 2 because they're like
check it, but
they're like 1 is for Nanjing.
Yeah,
we get
so Nanjing
back.
was the old capital. Obviously, Taipei is now the capital of Taiwan.
Yeah.
The Republic of China. So anyhow, the 1930s law by the KMT government, Kuomintang government, was in effect until like 1980s. And I was like, that's crazy. But you know what? Taiwan had gone through like 30 years of like white terror and like martial law. So obviously it was also not, again, it's all a republic, but no one has the votes, right? So, and it was not until like the 1980s where Taiwan was, after the end of its martial law period, right? The society is trying to move on and trying to transform itself into a democracy of some sort, that they were trying to get the laws together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just shocking.
It's like Mao and Chiang Kai-shek both died, and everybody in China and Taiwan kind of like climbed out of their bunkers. Yeah. Like the nuclear war is over, right? And like, okay, what do we do now? Like, how do we?
I know.
How
right?
do we put this stuff back? Yeah. How do we put this stuff back together?
People are going. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So that. Mm-hmm. So I mean. So that marriage law.
Yeah. Can I just say one more interesting thing? So I don't know if this is abolished today or not, but it is very much, I think, a hot topic, and that I've heard people talk about in media and people I know, that in Taiwan, until recently, or maybe even to today, that marital affairs is a crime. It's not a civil, like, it's not just something you can use to get a divorce, like as a court argument. It's actually a crime. So I was like, what? But
is that from the banning of concubinage that they are kind of trying to?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was the crime in the 1930s law. I don't think they have much time to deal with people.
It's a crime in the military, in the U.S. military. I know lots of people who.
You gotta protect your revolutionary soldiers.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was interesting. But yeah, even though that law was in Taiwan for like 50 years or so. Fast forward to today, Taiwan is the first country in Asia to have same-sex marriage, to have legalized same-sex marriage, right? Yeah. So even though we're like, the Nanjing government was not radical like the Chinese Soviet Republic. Yeah. So I guess who's radical now? But yeah, so.
Well, it's interesting. I mean,
we're not nearly nearly there, right?
I feel like we could do an episode on like the kind of the after images of Mao, like in modern China, like what's left of Mao and what's gone, right?
And what's coming back.
Well, I mean, right? Yeah. Of like, how much of him is still in modern Chinese law, modern Chinese society. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think the marriage thing is interesting because I always find it's one of those things that I just can't stop thinking about. Like whenever you see a movie set in like an ancient time, like in a non-modern time period, right? Like past 100 or 200 years. And there's like female characters. It's like movies and things. They don't really go into the fact that like these people are like, they're not even second-class citizens, right? They're like 10th-class citizens, right? Right? Yes. In the rules they have to face, right? I mean, I think you're the one who told me that, like, in a lot of parts of the United States, like until the 1950s, women couldn't even open up a bank account.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, I was like, did you know? Okay, I read this like feminist like book for like high school kids in America.
So Cherry, You'll have to forgive her because Cherry grew up in red.
Yeah, why don't you apologize
I'm
for me?
apologizing for you.
The right person.
Cherry grew up in red China.
I did not. I grew up in 90s China.
Cherry grew up in red communist Maoist China. And behind
woman holds up half the sky.
Behind the red curtain. Learning about feminism, it's like, you start with like a high school.
Yeah, but we already had it in 1950s.
Well, yeah, but see, Cherry, this is why we can't have feminism. Look what happened. Look what happened to China.
Right? Look what
happened.
When women have
give those women an inch.
Yeah.
And you got the Cultural Revolution.
I know. Still, no one has the votes, though, so you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But when did women get votes in America?
It's like 1920 or something.
Okay.
1910, 1920, something like that.
And they voted. They voted
prohibition.
Yeah. No more drinking for you.
No more booze. Well, I mean, because they didn't want to. Their husbands would come home and beat them.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. So I thought that was very. Yeah. I also read that from that book too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, anyway, hopefully that was interesting to people.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very interesting the kind of when you read books like Red Star Over China, which is obviously like a very naive.
I'm sorry, I don't like the book. I just hate the book.
I know, but so Red Star Over China is an American like journalist who goes to China in the 1930s, like when Mao's up in the mountains, like and he's basically like a nobody at that point, right?
Yeah. And what did he think of communism?
Right, the U.S. journalist was like basically just ate up every single thing Mao told him, like hook, line, and sinker.
He was like, these people are so energetic.
Is so great. This is
the future.
Yeah, this is the future, right? Yeah. But I do think that it's easy to kind of read some of this stuff that like Mao wrote, especially early on, and be like, oh wow, this is really great. But then you kind of have to look at some of the reality of how it actually played out.
Yeah.
And it's like, maybe he said nice things.
Communism is an idea, right? Yeah. It's not a executable idea. I think this level. I mean, maybe at like Star Trek's time.
Yeah, when we have robots.
When we have robots, but then I think today's society tells us that when we have robots, not women, humans will just be treated even more poorly.
Yeah.
But
it's like, oh, we don't even need workers anymore.
Yeah.
All we need is Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg.
But I mean, there is something to be said about the idea of it.
Yeah.
And how
it's exciting, right? I mean.
Yeah, and how the some of this language, right? Some of this writing is not bad writing. I know you compare it to like Donald Trump's tweets.
Yeah.
But let me just quote the West Wing one more time, okay? Sam Seaborn says, "You think a communist have never written an elegant sentence? How do you think they got everyone to be communists?" Yeah, although something to be argued, how they got everyone to be communists is really they killed all the landowners.
Yeah, they got
land for free.
Yeah,
so that's how they got everyone to be communists.
If you guys just beat that guy to death, you can all have 1/6 of his farm.
Exactly right. So it might not all be the elegant sentences, but I mean to read some of these early writings, there is an idea of like
there's an optimism, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you don't think there's
or
an
like
optimism?
achieving the goal of revolution at all costs. One of the byproducts is that we must liberate women. I cannot say that I hate that byproduct.
Yeah,
obviously. So, but it's a complicated history.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that was this week's episode of With Chinese Characteristics. If you liked it, feel free to give us a rate or talk to us on Twitter. If you don't like it, also talk to us on Twitter.
We're up for
we like to argue.
Productive discussion or some bantering.
Thank you for listening and have a nice day.
See you next time.